Hello and welcome. This is Mouse Gunner, and we're back with some more Kerbal Space Program. Now, we're not going to do the career in this video. We'll be doing that in other videos in the future. But I'd also like to start another series, and this time I'm going to call Mouse Gunner's Kerbal Space Program Quest. And the quest we have for us is something that I've been trying to do, not in video format, but in my own time for quite some time, even when it was not in the full launch release of the game. And that is to, if we go ahead and jump in the space plane hangar, that is to build a craft that we build in the space plane hangar, and the idea is it's going to take off from the runway, go up through the atmosphere, out into space, and be able to orbit Kerbal, and have enough fuel left over that if we wanted to, it would have just that enough fuel to be able to leave that orbit and then come back down to the surface and land safely. And now it doesn't necessarily have to land with landing gear or what have you, it just has to land, so parachutes would work as well, as long as the pilot doesn't die and more or less the craft stays intact. That is a successful mission. Now, it sounds simple, but it's actually one of the hardest missions I've yet encountered. Now, I don't know if somebody else on YouTube has already done something like this and managed it, but honestly, I have tried many times with this game to get this to work. Now, I will admit this was in previous versions of the game when we didn't have everything available to us like we have now, but even now, I've made a few attempts at this and has not been successful. But you could say a lot of my early attempts were kind of feeling out the technology and some of the changes that have happened in the game and figuring out what needs to be done. So, what did I do? I'm just going to kind of discuss some of the versions I made, initial test platforms. Now, they already have some stock, essentially assets, I guess you could say, or stock vehicles in the game to load up. But the vehicles that I made, and there's quite a long list here, but they're all mostly, some of them are just variants of the same thing. So I started off with the XAS, and that's how I start the prefix of all of these, because this is experimental air and space vehicle. So XAS, and then 1, or A1 means there's, some kind of modification to that version. So, I have 1, I have 1A, 1A2, 1A1, 1A2, 2, and so on, and I think I went up as far as XAS3. But just to show you some of these things, so XAS1, we pop that in. This was my initial kind of thing, and honestly, this didn't work because I made it much more complex than I really needed to. Essentially, my idea here, and this was kind of my initial planning, was to combine this engine, because if we look at the engines that are available to us, this is a lot of the difficulty of doing this, is getting up into that orbit requires you to have enough fuel and enough power to do it. Now, power can come in a lot of ways because you have all of these engines. But you have your traditional rocket engines, which are going to be liquid fuel and oxidizer. So if we look here, essentially the fuels that you're going to need are the liquid fuel and the oxidizer. Or you could have, for instance, these jet engines, which are liquid fuel and intake air from the atmosphere. And then you have solid fuel boosters like this. And then you have a couple hybrid engines, and these are the ones that, or variations of engines available to us. We also have some oddball ones that use monopropellant or xenon gas. So this is one that uses monopropellant, for instance, and this is one that uses xenon gas. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that those are wrong choices, but essentially what we have available to us are these engines. Now, what I focused on was using engines that use the intake air to initially get us high into the atmosphere. Now, the problem with the liquid, these engines is they need intake air, so eventually when you get high enough into the atmosphere, you're going to run out of, those engines are going to stop working. They're essentially going to burn out. And then you will fall back down. So you can't just use them to get into space, obviously. So That's the issue we have with this, but they have a lot of advantages. Liquid fuel tanks are a lot lighter if we look at the fuel tanks. For instance, this is a liquid fuel tank, only has liquid fuel, and this is a tank that has liquid fuel and oxidizer. Now they're exactly the same size, but if you look at the mass, 2.25 versus 0.9, you see a huge difference in weight, and that's one of the major advantages of liquid fuel powered engines, is because the fuel tanks are so much lighter. And this has a liquid fuel amount of 150, whereas this one has a liquid fuel amount of 180 and oxidizers of 220. But I will point out also that the rocket engines are usually a lot more, they burn a lot more fuel a lot quicker. An engine like this, which was my initial prototype, it only burns liquid fuel wise 0.122 a second, whereas if you have your normal rocket booster, you see propellants there 6.577 a second. So a lot of liquid fuel is burned very quickly with these rocket boosters. Now the advantage of these rocket engines though is they have quite a lot of power, but the problem is they burn that fuel so quickly. So there's a lot of, kind of compromises with the choices you make here, because you want to get up into space. You need the power to be able to do that. Now, jet engines can have that power, but they essentially have a limit on how high they can take you. With the engines that can take you, it doesn't matter where you are in the atmosphere. For instance, a rocket engine, do you have enough fuel to get up into the atmosphere is the question. And if you have enough fuel, are you too heavy now to get up there? Because the more fuel you pack on, the heavier you're going to be. And there starts to be diminishing returns with the weight. So this is why this is such a difficult challenge, is because there's all of these constraints. If you're too heavy, you won't make it. If you don't have enough fuel, you won't make it. If you don't have enough power, you won't make it. Now, the other engine that we used is this engine. Now, this is something that's a little bit newer, because when I was playing this game earlier, this engine took both liquid fuel and oxidizer, but now it just takes liquid fuel. It does have downsides to it, though. It doesn't quite have the power that, it has more power than I think this jet engine has, but it doesn't have as much power as, for instance, this jet engine. It also burns much more fuel, as we see 1.53 a second as opposed to 0.122 or 0.459. So we see that it burns fuel quicker. It also, and it doesn't really say this in its stats, it heats up very quickly. So this is kind of an engine you don't want to have running for very long periods of time, because it will overheat. So you can see all of the kind of layers of things that are, limiting us in this. Now, one other engine that is really important to talk about, though, is this engine here, which is a hybrid engine. It works either using liquid fuel and intake air, or liquid fuel and oxidizer. So it can run both in an atmosphere and outside an atmosphere. Now, you need to have that oxidizer for it to work, but you still need it. One downside of this engine, though, is it doesn't have an alternator, so you don't get electrical charge from it. So if you're only using this engine, you're going to need electricity somehow. So that's kind of a constraint with this build as well. So initially, because this is kind of a newer thing for me, with now that I'm getting back into the game, having an engine that only uses liquid fuel and uses no oxidizer or an intake air, I thought this really gave me a possibility to do this. So with my first build, I essentially had the idea of using 3 engines. I'd use 2 jet engines for the power to get us up high into the atmosphere. And then once I got high into the atmosphere, my feeling was that this one thruster would be enough. Didn't really prove to be the case. And honestly, this build is a little bit too complex, and it's very, very heavy. I really loaded it down with a lot of things that at this point isn't really necessary, because kind of the idea I'm using here is I'm also limiting. I have to have, monopropellant, so I can use these RCS, systems as navigation in space and things like that. I have parachutes. This one was a little bit overboard, because I have, 6 parachutes and then 2 of the larger parachutes. So a lot of parachutes in case something goes wrong and I want to, or, I just can't do that, on the ground landing. I've got that option open to me to just hit the parachutes. Probably went a little overboard with the parachutes on this one. But mostly the problem with this is it's more complex than it needed to be, and as a result, it's a little too heavy and it has a lot of downsides to it. So I could show you some of the variants for this, but mostly with that, I switched from using these less powerful jet engines to the more powerful ones, and that was pretty much it with some of the variants. It was just kind of playing around with different engine setups. I don't actually remember what the 182 variant was, but essentially this was a dead end. So then I was thinking, I made this thing too complex with the 3 tanks, having that third one up above. Oh yeah, I remember the one thing that's really an issue with this is because if we cancel, with this thruster up above like that, it makes the thrust unstable as soon as you hit this thruster, because that thrust is, kind of above the center line of the craft, has a habit of doing kind of just a back flip, front flip kind of thing, and just, is a disaster. So that was the main problem with this. So moving along, we've got the XAS2. We're going to load that in. And I apologize if this is making the video pretty long, but I kind of want you guys to understand some of the processes I went through. So this is a pretty nice looking craft, and as a matter of fact, this is probably the most successful I've been with this craft in this. I think I had to use the XAS2A1, but essentially we have those less powerful jet engines, and what is this? The atomic rocket motor here in a center line. So we still have the 3 tanks set up, but we put that atomic rocket in the middle and the center, so it's not kind of off balancing the craft. So when that fires, there's no big deal when that fires. So essentially that is this version, and then I upgraded it to the XAS2A1, which uses the more powerful jet engines, which it really was necessary. And that version, the A1, was the most successful I've been. I think I got it up to I don't remember exactly the height. I'll probably remember when we do the launch exactly what it was. It was, I think it was something like 35,000 meters, something like that. Is how high up it got, and it was really close. As a matter of fact, for that brief second, the map told me I was actually going to exit the atmosphere, but it actually didn't end up panning out that way. So that was the closest I've come to being successful, to at least getting out of the atmosphere with this much, which is an accomplishment in and of itself. Okay, so let's go ahead and just show you another variant I tried. When that didn't get me quite high enough, I tried this as a variant. So this has the modification of upgrading the more powerful jet engines. And then I tried to do some solid fuel boosters to give me a little bit of oomph. Because essentially what happens is, with the way I flew this, is you have the jet engines, you get those, you use those for your main propulsion to get you high enough into the atmosphere. Because one of the problems with the atomic rocket is that it doesn't work very well low atmosphere. When you have a dense atmosphere, it's not very powerful. Once you start getting up into a vacuum, it becomes more and more powerful. So you need to really get it higher up in the atmosphere. So essentially, I'd get it up to the point where the jet engines were, about ready to die. They're getting close to dying. Then I'd hit the atomic rocket, and it just accelerated, big acceleration. But then once the jet engines kick out, the acceleration just started to plummet, and I didn't have enough energy to get out of the atmosphere, and that's what happened. So I thought what I would do with solid fuel boosters is I'd hold off. I do the same kind of process, but once those jet engines kicked out and the acceleration started to drop, I'd hit the solid fuel boosters, and that gave me more acceleration. Only problem with this is that I made the craft too heavy. So, it did everything that I wanted it to do, but the acceleration it was getting wasn't high enough because it was taking it so much longer and so much more boost to get it up to that acceleration. In the end, this ended up being a worse result than the A1, which didn't have these solid fuel boosters. So that was kind of a catastrophe. So finally, to wrap this thing up, I have the XAS3, which honestly was a dead end. And with this, all I did, now you'll notice a different wing alignment and everything. All I did is I added on 2 atomic rocket boosters because I was thinking maybe we needed more power in that, second stage of everything. So once the jet engine kicked out, we need more power to get it up there, and that was the theory. The only problem with that is, first off, just one of these jet engines will get you up there, but it takes forever. It doesn't quite have that much power. Secondly, because I fit on, a little bit bigger tail section and added on another fuel tank and, weighed it down a bit because these atomic rockets are definitely a lot heavier than the jet engines are, and we can actually see that. So the weight here is 1.8 versus 3 for the atomic rocket motors. So a lot heavier craft. So as a result, the jet engine is just, it's really chugging along. I mean, it's barely getting you up there. It takes forever to get up there. And then once you get up there, the atomic rocket motors, because they're not quite as powerful, they just don't have enough boost to do it. And now you don't run out of fuel or anything. You just essentially get to a point where you stall out, and that's the end of things. And it's the same result with all of these experiments. Is essentially you get to a point where you just don't have enough energy and you just stall out, and then that's it. You don't run out of fuel, you just stall out. Now, with other experiments I've done in the past with using this engine, which you might be crying out, Mouse Gunner, why aren't you using this engine, this hybrid engine? Because that sounds like the right engine to use. The problem I had with this one is that you run out of fuel. You have the power, you just don't have the fuel, and then that's where you really have the problem of, to have enough fuel, you become too heavy, and then you just don't have the power. So that's the problem with this engine. But this engine is what has gotten me the furthest I've ever been before, because I've been up into space with this. But for me, I feel like this is kind of a dead-end solution, because it's too hard to have that fuel balance just right so that you can get up into space. But maybe there's been changes in the game enough so that does work. But from what I've seen, that's kind of a dead-end system. But maybe we'll try that in another, video as we continue this series, if this is, a popular series. Okay, so that was a lot of rambling for me. Now it's time to build our next version. So I had to go through all that because I wanted to do kind of an intro to what's been going on with this series. So let's go ahead and do a new craft. And this is going to be labeled, and I hope this one will work. I have a lot of promise for this one. That's why I'm doing a series here. So we always have to start with our pod, and I want to start with this one because I feel like it is one of the better options we have. It's decently lightweight. Now this is technically the lightest weight module you have that can hold, a pilot, which is part of my mission. Is it has to be piloted. I could do one of these drones, and then that would be super light, and probably would be not that hard to do. But this adds a little bit more challenge onto things. So we're going to do a command pod, and then we're going to cap that off with, we need some fuel tanks, and it is, I believe, this one, which has a little bit of liquid fuel, and it gives us kind of a nose cone. And then we're going to go to our controls. Now this is pretty much going to be the same setup I use all the time, which is a little SAS module here, which is going to give us a lot of, SAS boosts and things. Probably not going to really help us all that much for the mission we're going to do. If we ever got up into space, though, it would help us out. Now, I'm not sure exactly if I want these inline wheels or not. The one thing you have to kind of consider with the inline wheels is they add weight on, but they may help with maneuverability. And all my other experiments, I hadn't really used them, so we're going to kind of stick with that, but I want to keep the weight down as low as I can, honestly, with this flight. Okay, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and get the rest of our craft built. So I do want the monopropellant. That's not the size. This is the size I want. Because we're going to need some of that for getting our maneuverability in the vacuum, which is kind of a requirement I've kind of added on there. All right, now our normal fuel tanks, which we're going to use liquid fuel. I'm going to do 2 of those, and then we're going to end cap that with the atomic motor. Okay, so now what I'm going to do for the bottom part of this is I'm going to grab. I've been kind of torn on this of using this for intake air because I'm going to need intake air. It's going to have a little bit of liquid fuel, but not a ton. And it's roughly the same size as these fuel tanks here. Probably stick it right there. This would probably be the initial version. We may change this a little bit later if we need more fuel. Don't think we'll really need the fuel. The one question I have, though, is what does it weigh? Because that might sway me here. Okay, it's not that heavy, so it's not that big of a deal. And, you know, the lighter we are, the better we are. That's kind of the strategy I'm going with this one. Lighter is better. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to grab some fuel tanks here. We're going to grab 2 more. There we have it. And then we're going to slap on our last engine, which is going to be this one. Now, hopefully this isn't going to unbalance the weight too much. That could be a real problem. Okay, then we're going to want intake. I'm going to do this one as it is the most efficient of the intakes. And it kind of looks cool as well. We're going to need more intake as well. Now the question is, do we put the wing on top or on bottom? I'm thinking on bottom. I'm going to use these. I'm going to, yeah, I want that and dual. So we just want the wings to be straight. Now, where the wings are in relation to the craft is going to really matter for where the center of the weight is, but we're not going to really know that until we're close to done. We're going to want some control surfaces. This is always kind of tricky, these control surfaces. I don't know why they never orient the way that you think they would, but you usually have to kind of move them around a little bit before you get them. Let's see, does that look right? Okay, good. We look good there. So we've got our control surfaces. We're going to need a tail. Now again, where the tail comes in, I'm going to use these ones. Where the tail comes in is going to matter later more. You might have to bring them forward or to the rear. A lot of that just depends on where that center of lift is, which is very important. Okay, so we have our basic wings and everything. Now we have to think about how we're going to land or even just take off. So we're going to need some landing gear. So I'm going to do a small landing gear on the front. We don't want this dual. Okay, and that's probably a good placement for that. Now the question is where we're going to place the rear landing gear. So let's see, our medium landing gear is taller. It does look like that is the case. Let's get off this so that we can get our landing gear. Now is that going to make it weird? It does look like it's going to be a little weird. I don't like that. Looks like the medium landing gear is a little bit too big. Because what happens if we use the small landing gear is our butt might be bumping on the ground here, but it might be alright. Kind of a little closer to the front too. I'm not sure how much I like that. That's one of the things that I wish they would have done a little bit more with, is a little bit more variety of landing gear, because it's like we kind of want in between what we've got in size. And I don't want a fixed landing gear because that's not quite right. Maybe we do the medium landing gear and then... Oh, that looks awful. I'll have to figure this landing gear thing out. Because the problem is, with the landing gear, if we put them too close to the middle, they will not be very stable. I might do something like this, so it's, you know, out a little. But it should be roughly the same height. I don't know how stable that's going to be, but I think that's the route we're going to go for now. Okay, so we have our landing gear. We have all the basic things we need. what I like to do whenever I have a structure like this that is, you know, kind of linked together, is I never really trust the structural stability of it. So what I'm going to do is just do kind of linking struts. What are these things even called? Yeah, struts. To kind of just strengthen the whole thing. Because usually I think what happens is whatever, like for instance, this is linked to that. But this is not linked to that. At least that's the way it used to work in the game. So what happened would be is the two things would kind of flop, and you would have it just be incredibly unstable. So when this thruster would boost, it would just kind of, you know, bounce up and down, and it'd just be crazy for stability, and it, you know, it wouldn't really work. So that's probably as many struts as we need there. Now we need to get onto our RCS thrusters. Probably put a couple on top and a couple on bottom. Put them roughly in the same place. There we go. And then we need up and down, so we'll put one here and we'll put one close to the nose. I probably should have done... those look roughly straight. This, you know, angle snap, because sometimes the game, yeah, I don't know, that doesn't look too straight to me. I have a real problem with that. I want them to be perfectly straight, so it's getting me actually up and down thrust, not at an angle. Okay, so that's a lot better. Okay, so we have most of our adjustments, and those aren't matching up as well, which kind of bothers me. Let's take off the... There, that should line up a little bit better. All right, so we have most of our basic requirements for this. I'm probably going to end up putting a couple parachutes on. I like to do that just to kind of be a safety net for... in case the landing doesn't go too well, or the craft isn't all that stable and we need to bring it down safely. I'm probably going to be reverting flights that don't go well, because this is just sandbox, it doesn't really matter. But in theory, if we had, you know, a mission we had to abort, the parachutes would allow for that. So now we actually have to set up our staging. So we're going to want to have the atomic rocket motor function secondly. So we're going to need at least 2 stages. So we're going to have the jet engine go first, then the atomic rocket motor, and then the parachutes if we need them. And that's essentially, I don't think I'm missing anything out. The only thing I like to throw on is I like to throw on a commutatron, just because, you know, it allows you to transmit data, and it's not really necessary, but I do it anyway because I think it adds a little bit of flair to the craft. And I don't think that is angling quite the way I want it to. Oh, there it goes, right there. So there you go, and it kind of like goes in with the sensor package, and I think it kind of looks nice. But you know, if we had some kind of scientific data or whatever to transmit, that gives us a little bit of flexibility. So let's go ahead and save this. This isn't necessarily the finished product, it's just our initial test. And again, I apologize, this video is really long, but I want to kind of give you guys an intro of what's going on with this video. Alright, oh, I am forgetting a couple things. So first we want to make sure we have the center of lift and the center of mass roughly the same, and it looks like they're not. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring these wings forward, make sure we're on the double so that we get them repeated, and get that pretty close. So roughly there, it looks like, right. And then probably bring the tail section forward a little bit. The problem with this is if you don't have this center of lift done right, essentially what's going to happen is it's going to be hard to control, but it's also probably going to do a death flip and when it takes off, which is bad. So that looks roughly right. It doesn't have to be perfect, but as long as it's not super imbalanced like what it was, where the lift was way back here, but the mass was way up here. So there we go. We've balanced the lift and mass. Hopefully the mast being a little above where the lift is going to cause us too many problems, but we don't really know until we do it. We've got all our stages set, so we should be good to go. Now there's other things I could have tacked on here. Oh, I forgot a tail. That's one thing that we definitely need. Alright, so let's slap a tail on. Just use one of these for simplicity. Don't want two, I just want one. And let's bring it back as far as it can go. Right there. Okay. There we go. We have a tail, and we have everything ready to go. So let's save that one more time, and let's do our launch. Should be ready to go. Now, I'm not promising this is going to work, but this kind of gives you guys an intro of what the Mouse Gunner's quest is and what we need to do. I am concerned about these landing gear not being stable enough, but it looks like we're more or less straight, so let's go ahead and slap on our SAS, throttle up, and fire our first stage. Now the real question here is, and I'm going to flip on the fuel as well, are we going to have enough power with just one thruster to get us up there? I do like the way that this craft kind of looks. It's kind of reminds me a little bit. Oh, that was pretty good. It took off pretty quickly, so I don't think speed is a problem. Let's go ahead and get our landing gear in. Alright, so it flies pretty nice. It looks like it's getting up there in speed very nicely. Alright, so let's angle it up a little bit. It's very controllable as well. In any case, the way it looks kind of reminds me a little bit. It doesn't look exactly like this, but like, you know, the F4 Phantom. So we're definitely getting up there in speed pretty quickly. We're, you know, approaching 700 meters a second, which is really nice speed. As far as the handling of the craft goes, it looks like it handles pretty well, which is definitely better than some of my other experiments. It looks like we balanced our lift pretty well and our controllability. And oftentimes, lighter is better. So we're not going to fire our second stage yet. The main reason, I did forget intake air. We probably need more intake air than when we gave this thing, but we'll leave that for a future variant. But definitely, and I made another mistake. So we are going to revert. I am starting to realize things that I left off the plane that we're definitely going to need. Okay, so things that I forgot. I need intake air, and I also need a system to be able to transfer fuel. So first thing we're going to do, and we don't need this on the angle snap anymore, we're going to grab a tube that goes from the bottom to the top, and then we're also going to take one from the top to the bottom. So now we're transferring fuel from these different tanks. That was the thing I forgot to do. And then also, we're going to want more intake air than what we have, because this jet engine requires quite a lot of intake air. So we're going to add on a couple of these scoops. And thinking of where would be best here, probably something like that would be nice. That looks pretty good. That's probably as much as we need. I mean, we could go a little bit crazy here and add a lot more on. But for all of this we add on weight. Let's maybe grab a couple of these. These add a little bit of intake air, but not a lot. I'm not sure if I like aesthetically how that looks, though. Yeah, I'm not so sure I'm a big fan of that aesthetically. So we're just going to be happy with the intake air we have. But this should help a little bit. It's going to put it up from, I think it was 1 to, it should be 2.2 now. So let's go ahead and save that on up. But this was very important because we want to be able to use these fuel tanks for both engines. So let's go ahead and launch now. So I apologize for that, a little bit of start, but we got to see that everything was working fine. So we should be good for launch now. Alright, so we're going to do SAS, throttle up, and hit our stage. It should come off the runway pretty quickly. But this is a kind of a quest that I really love, is just getting it up into that. I want it to be kind of like, I talk about the F4 Phantom. This is going to be like, like a space fighter, an air and space fighter. So you take it off from a runway and it zooms up into space, And then, maybe it needs refueling once it gets there, but at least it can get up into orbit so that you can get maybe, some kind of fuel vehicle over and refuel it. But this thing does handle very well in comparison to some of the other craft I had, which were much more unwieldy. This is very stable in the air. We'll have to see with more maneuvering how it does, but definitely more stable than some of my other experiments. So maybe just to speed things up, I'll speed up time here, although that I have noticed sometimes messes with your acceleration. It calculates acceleration kind of weird for some reason. Oh, and I do want to pay attention to my fuel numbers here, because I want to pay attention to when my air intake is really dropping off. But roughly around 10,000 meters. I'm probably going to... no, we're starting to be unstable here. I'm hitting down hard. Ooh, boy. We're going to have to probably cut off thrust here. Get our nose back down. And probably what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit our second stage. Ooh. Yeah, sometimes you get stuff like this, and this is what makes this challenge so difficult. Alright, so we're going to hit the second stage. So when we throttle up, it should be even boost now. And hopefully we shouldn't nose up. I'm going to keep the thrust a little bit low. I might have already hosed us with this. Yeah, it's tipping up. There it goes. I'm not hitting any controls. Yeah, alright. So we have a little bit of stability issues once we get high in the atmosphere. So that is kind of a problem that we're going to have to work out with future versions. So let's go ahead and shut down this engine so it stops working. We don't really need it to fly in the atmosphere. Let's see if we can bring this in for a successful landing once we figure out how to get it to stop stalling out like it is. Let's throttle up, maybe give us some power. This is kind of a problem, though, I've noticed. It wasn't so much of a problem when I did other versions of this game, like in earlier versions. But once you stall out, you kind of go into this death spin. And sometimes it's kind of difficult to recover from it. And I have SAS and everything, and it is not wanting to recover at all. So this might just be a death spiral down to the bottom. I don't think this is just a problem with this craft. This is a problem I've had with pretty much every experiment I've done. If you get into one of these spirals, it oftentimes is very difficult to get out of. And I've noticed that SAS seemingly just makes it worse rather than better. But I am trying to... Okay, so we're just going up. So yeah, I'm hitting down as hard as I can, and it is not doing jack for me. As a matter of fact, the controls are not responding to me pretty much at all. Alright, it looks like we're starting to level out a little bit. Ooh. Alright, I don't think we're going to survive this. Alright, let's cut our engine. Let's see if we can figure this out without the engine. We're starting to get low in the atmosphere. Now you know why I have parachutes. Okay, I think we've stabilized, so we can hit SAS. That should get us stable. Hit the thruster, get our speed up. See if we can pull out of this. I'm doing slow pulls because I don't want the thing to go back into a spin. Alright. We managed to get out of the death spiral, but that is definitely a problem I've had in the past. Alright, so let's see if we can get this thing landed. Alright, dip the nose down. Cut our throttle. We need to start slowing down. Not necessarily saying that I'm going to land this thing, but I'm going to try. Let's cut the throttle all the way until we need it. We're dropping in altitude here. I think it's a good time to maybe hit the landing gear, throttle up a little bit. Not going quite level. Okay, I don't want to gain too much speed here. I pull off the landing, it will make up for a lot of the other mistakes, although I'm not really going to the runway all that straight. It doesn't really matter as long as I don't smash into a building. Probably going to need to pull up here a little bit. Right, now let's try and get it straighter. A little bit of rudder. Okay, and I want to get her down. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to make it. I don't think I'm going to make it. I'm not going to make it. Alright, well, we'll just focus for somewhere on the ground here. No, no, pull up, pull up. Ah. Alright, so much for that landing. A little too hot with the landing. Well, experiments sometimes don't always work the way that you intend. In any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and I hope you're looking forward to a continuation of this series and finally getting us up into space. In any case, this is Mouse Gunner, signing out.